Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Report Desk Africa, and you've just missed the first half of the show where we'll be discussing about the reactions on Africa's populous nation, Nigeria, where the Presidential Election Petitions Tribunal have made their verdict, affirming the victory of the sitting president, Bola Tinubu. And we know that opposition parties have been reacting, as well as activists and some supporters across the country. Now, African leaders have demanded sweeping changes to the global financial system and urged the international community to back a surge in renewable energy as they wrap up a landmark climate summit in the continent. Judging by that, we know that Africa is acutely vulnerable to the growing impact of climate change. The leaders at the three-day meeting in Nairobi were eager to cast the continent not as a victim, but a long-ignored continent now, not as a victim, but a long-ignored ally in the fight against global warming. Now, based on the final declaration from the meeting on behalf of the African Union, Africa poses both the potential and the ambition to be a vital component of the global solution to climate change. Now, my co-host here, News Central's Blessings Mosugu, has compiled this report with the details.
Unlocking green growth across the continent on a scale that can contribute meaningfully to decarbonization of the global economy requires a massive scaling up in funding. It called on the international community to ease Africa's crushing debt burden and reform the global financial system to unblock investment in clean energy. Consensus is hard-won across Africa, a diverse continent of 1.4 billion people, where some governments are championing a renewable-powered future, while others defend their reserves of fossil fuels.
La déclaration de Nairobi a été adoptée unanimement et par acclamation. Notre sommet a été un grand succès.
Analysts say a united African voice could generate momentum for a series of key gatherings, including the G20 meeting in New Delhi this weekend, ahead of a crunch UN climate summit starting in November. Africa attracted only 2% of global spending on renewables over the last decade, according to the leader's statement. But it said the continent will need a tenfold increase in the finance capital flowing into renewables in the next 7 years, some $600 billion, to achieve the aim of boosting renewable from 56 gigawatts in 2022 to at least 300 gigawatts by 2030.
Tout a été passé en revue. Le narratif du contexte et les défis que nous lance le changement climatique, les impératifs du renforcement du leadership africain, les nouveaux systèmes de financement du développement environnemental durable, les responsabilités internationales face à l'Afrique, et j'en passe.
Efforts at the summit to up investment in renewables were given a boost, with the United Arab Emirates pledging $4.5 billion to accelerate Africa's switch to clean energy. Ruto said a tally of funding pledges for the continent had reached $23 billion at the summit, but he did not provide a detailed breakdown.
During this Action Focus Summit, various stakeholders, including governments, the private sector, multilateral banks, and philanthropists, have made substantial commitments totaling a remarkable US dollars 23 billion for green growth, mitigation, and adaptation efforts across Africa.
Leaders also pressed the world's wealthy polluters to honor their pledges, including to provide $100 billion a year for clean energy and to help them brace for climate disasters. Blessings Mosuru, reporting for News Central.
Now, before we go into details of the Africa Climate Summit, breaking news reaching us now in the studio is that Lagos lawmakers have dropped 3 commissioners designates in the new list that was sent to it. Now, it's just confirmed 15 of them. And then the details of those that were dropped include Sam Egube, Engineer Odushote, and Tolani Suli. The lawmakers have indeed confirmed 15 of them while dropping out these 3 names. And that's the breaking news that we have for you. Again, Lagos lawmakers have dropped 3 commissioners designates in the new list.
And of course, we'll be giving you the updates as it unfolds. Well, that's all we have on the breaking news. Now, going back to our conversation about the Africa Climate Summit, we understand that it held in Nairobi, Kenya. And if you remember vividly, the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, had come out to say that the nations need to work together to tackle the issue of climate change. It's been a long time coming conversation. We've had different summits and meetings. We've had the COP meetings and all that. And the most interesting of it is, while the Africa Climate Summit was ongoing, another summit relating to climate change was also going on, concurrently. So that's to show how important the issue of climate change has been. We're going to be analyzing the situation and talking about it on Report Desk Africa. Adeshewa, what do you make of the Africa Climate Summit? I mean, we've had so many conversations about it, and one thing that people keep saying is, what is it that we're doing new? What is it that we're saying that is new that we've not done before?
So I think I'm going to applaud African leaders, because I think this is the first of its kind happening on the continent. We've always had to travel far and wide over the seas to attend COP28, COP27, and this time African leaders have said, this concerns us the most, and we must start to have that conversation here on our continent, because like we've said over and over again, Africa contributes just about 5% to the current damage on the climate space, but we are bearing the brunt the most. See what is happening in Kenya. See what is happening in Sudan. We have those in the west. the eastern part of the continent are bearing the brunt the most. We also see those in the southern part of the continent. We've seen excess rainfall in South Africa. We've seen a lack of rainfall in some parts. The northern part of Kenya, I beg to be corrected, and Sudan as well. This has recorded death of infant mortalities on the highway because of malnutrition
and even displacement.
So I think so it's important that we begin to have this conversation now and not leave it in the hands of those who do not even understand your problems, because they could only see it on the papers, they can only read the figures, but they cannot relate to the actual realities on ground. So I think it's important, and it's a laudable effect. And I will throw a special applaud to the president of Kenya, because he has proved over and over again that he's a Pan-African, and this is one way to prove that even further. And
talking about applauding the president of Kenya, now he did appear at the venue of the summit with an electric car, which he drove there himself. Wow. Talk about leading by example. Exactly. He's trying to pass a message. And I think that talking about salient points, now one of the things that has been brought to the front burner that I think has been a conversation that has been avoided for the longest time is climate financing and green growth. Now we've talked about the need to tackle climate change, but for the longest time, nobody actually, I wouldn't say nobody, it was an issue, but we didn't exactly pay much attention to it. And that's because we're heavily dependent on the Western countries that at the end of the day did not keep to their promise. So I'm glad that they're bringing the issue of financing to the front burner, because talking about green growth, for example, Africa has the ability to power the entire world with green growth if only we use our resources right. So it is important to note that it's important to know how we're going to finance these changes, because we can't just keep having conversations of how to tackle climate change without talking about how it can be changed. So it's quite interesting. But I think another thing that is quite mind-boggling now is the issue of coups and wars on ground. The recent of which is Gabon. We've had so many coups in the last few years, and it's like it's one coup is triggering the other, and it feels like a bit of a distraction from the causes that we need to be talking about. So I think, again, it's applaudable that we're even having these summits amidst these coups, because normally it's a distracting phenomenon, don't you think?
Yes. So I'm going to make reference to some of the quotes by President Ruto. He said Africa is the continent with 60% of the world's renewable energy assets, including solar, wind, geothermal, and hydropower. That Africa is also projected to have 40% of the world's workforce by 2100. So this just goes to show that Africa has the potential. We have the prospects, and then if we just turn blind eye to trying to manage our climate challenges, by these projections, we may not be able to, meet up with the expectations of the forecasters. And I believe that summits like this one should begin to be at the forefront when we're discussing anything in Africa. And I really would like to have countries like Nigeria, countries like South Africa be like an active participant of summits like this, because these are countries with the top economies on the continent. Now we have more bilateral relationships with the Western countries. Then we have, we are beginning to have like the mutual connection with the BRICS, looking at what South Africa is doing with the BRICS summits. Yeah. So when we have countries like South Africa, Nigeria, pioneering this summits like this one, it will make the conversation even more serious, and it would even attract the Westerners, countries in the G20 to say, okay, now this is a serious business. It's not business as usual. We have to prioritize the interest of this continent, because we know what we are doing to them, because it is a matter of what they are doing to the continent. Because if we are not contributing much to the problems, why bear the brunt the most? And then the finances are not even coming down to this part of the world. So it's important that instead of having to discuss schools because of the irregularities of some civilian government, we should by now be discussing the prosperity of the continent, talking about climate change. And the conversations should go down to our schools. When I say schools, by now we should have a culture of renewable energy in the schools. For example, school bus. We also have things like, renewing the plastics, recycling, I beg your pardon, recycling plastics in schools. So when you begin to imbibe these cultures in the minds of, students, African students specifically, they know that our school buses shouldn't run on diesel or petrol alone. They know that they are trains. I would also applaud Lagos State in Nigeria, the economic capital in Nigeria, where we know that a blue rail line has been launched. Yeah. And the blue rail works specifically on electricity. It doesn't have to, you can say bye to noise pollution and also air pollution, so to speak. So those are things that we think every state in Nigeria, every country on the continent should begin to adopt.
Well, I think that another flaw that was kind of detected at the Africa Climate Summit is the fact that now we know that we need the financing, and we know what the problems are, and we know what the solution should be, yes, but we don't have a proper plan of action. And I remember I saw a clip at the ACS, the Africa Climate Summit, where the Eritrean president, Isaias Afwerki, got really, uncomfortable with the fact that we have these plans, outlined, but nobody has a proper plan of action. So I think is essential that every country now on the African continent goes back to, recalculate. Let's go back to the drawing board, know what each country can contribute to tackling climate change.
Yes, definitely. So as we discuss the impact of the climate change on the continent, we'll go on a short break now. And then when we come back, we'll give you details of some of the challenges and also proper solutions to these problems of climate change on the continent. We'll be right back.
Well, it's time now for us to take a critical look at what to expect in the coming weeks. Now, on the first story on our forecast for today is the ousted Gabon president, Ali Bongo, is now free. I remember that Africans generally on social media kind of made light of a situation, Adishawa, when they turned it into music, but it was actually a very serious case. And it's interesting to know that he's free. Now, military leaders in Gabon say they have freed the ousted president, Ali Bongo, from house arrest 1 week after they declared coup in the country. Now, this also includes permission to travel abroad for medical checkups. The army seized power shortly after he had been declared the winner of the election disputed by the opposition.
Now, just talking about the climate change and now the Africa's climate summit that was just discussed briefly. Now, the leaders have proposed a global carbon tax regime in a joint declaration which carved the 3-day Africa Climate Summit in Kenya's capital. And the document proposes that major polluters commit more resources to help poorer nations, one that the leaders have now agreed to use as their basis of their negotiating position at the November's COP28 summit.
And now going to Rwanda, the police have arrested a suspected serial killer after discovering more than 10 corpses in a pit dog in the kitchen of his Kigali home. Quite devastating news there. Police say that the 34-year-old suspect met his victims, men and women, in bars and lured them to his rented accommodation on the outskirts of the Rwandan capital. According to the reports, more than 10 bodies had been found, and another source says that 14 victims have been counted so far. This really does feel like something out of a horror movie, Adeshowa.
Definitely. I could relate to that from a particular series on one series on, I think, on one movie platform where, this is the same way this man, captures his victim from bars and then keeps them in his house. It's quite devastating to know that this happens in real life and not just fictions, in the movies.
It sure is. Well, we wouldn't allow that to dampen our mood today. It's been a very interesting conversation on Report Desk Africa. Thank you again for joining us on another episode, and we promise to bring you more insightful programs like this, especially on Report Desk Africa, where we analyze situations and not just give you the news. So tune in again next week as we give you the trending stories across the African continent. Thank you for joining us. My name is Blessings Mosugu.
And my name is Adeshowa Odeshoga. See you next week.